Welcome to our third New Hampshire Charter School webinar in our series, and we're going to do two parts on restorative practices in schools. I am Karen Matzo, and let's get going. There I am. I am the PD director at Demonstrated Success, and we do a lot of work around New England, and maybe you've heard of us. Yeah, just reach out if you need any professional development. So, we are going to start with an introduction to restorative behavior practices. We'll talk about the origin and the need for these practices, the impact of these practices, and then we'll get into some of the practices themselves. So, restorative practices are based on a lot of these principles: the principle of mutual respect, relationship building, taking responsibility for our actions, and repairing when a relationship has been fractured. And then the word reintegration is floating about there too. And that basically means an emphasis on reintegrating both the victim and the perpetrator in any situation, and the importance of that and rebuilding the strong community. So those are some of the principles. Here's some definitions, right? So repair is a person who causes harm is expected to repair that harm to the fullest extent possible. So that's one of the principles that I was just alluding to. The next one, reintegration, encourages collaboration of the community and the person who caused the harm, rather than isolating or using coercion with the person that caused the harm. Relationships are what heals, right? We know this. And those relationships can begin to heal once a person takes responsibility and is accountable for their actions. And respect. Respect keeps the process safe. Oftentimes we use protocols and just safe ways to interact for all the people involved. Respect for themselves, respect for others, and then taking responsibility. We encourage students, teachers, anyone in a community to take responsibility. It's a personal choice, and everybody involved in a situation needs to understand their own impact. So, all of these ideas stand sort of in contrast to a punitive approach to behavior and discipline. So, I want you to keep all of these words in the forefront of your minds as we talk today. Let's talk about classroom management. Classroom management style, you want to try to foster a style that encourages and honors student to student relationships, teacher to student relationships. You always, firm, we always want to be firm in our classrooms and our interactions so that people feel, safe, kids feel safe, adults feel safe and productive, but you want to stay fair and warm and friendly. We focus on a level of high control with high support. We're really going to support our students, and we're going to keep firm boundaries. We're going to do things with students instead of doing things for them or to them. So we need to include them in the dialogue, in the planning, in the rule making. And we're going to make sure that they participate along with us. We're going to intentionally embed relationship building into our daily program. And that can be through content, specific content decisions. It can be through collaborative processes, collaborative learning. It can be through doing circles, community circles with your class. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And finally, we have utilized logical consequences, right? So we don't punish so much as we let students feel the logical consequences of their choices, right? In your classrooms, we encourage you with a restorative lens, if you're pursuing a restorative lens, to have a space where students and maybe even teachers, adults, can regulate. So, as students get sort of maybe escalated in their day, there should be a place that they can go or an opportunity to downregulate or de escalate or refocus. These spaces can be used after you remind or redirect them with relation to what the behavior that was expected as opposed to what they actually did. Regulation space can be used. It could be a place where students can write or listen and identify the feelings that they're having and practice strategies to calm their body or their mind, such as breathing strategies, coloring, things that are calming. You may have heard, I once saw a regulation space that had pinwheels. And so there's, just to get kids to do some of that slower diaphragm breathing that's very calming and soothing. Regulation spaces offer students an opportunity to stay in the classroom, right? As opposed to being isolated. They can take a break in the context of their community. It allows students to acknowledge their feelings of where they're at. And it publicly sort of acknowledges that it's normal to have big feelings. Structured, the spaces should be structured, okay, and predictable. And students can work towards using these regulation type of spaces independently. Make their own decisions about when they need to go there or not go there and what they need to do. So here's a sort of a process that an adult can use with a student who's in a regulation space. So a student may write about what happened and what they're feeling. And then a student may choose a strategy to downregulate or de-escalate. You can see that there. There might be choices in the space. And after the student has had an opportunity to calm their body, their mind, and identify how they're feeling, you might support them to help them get more detailed and more specific how they're feeling, to expand their emotional vocabulary. Maybe something like a feeling board. There's a great circle, a feeling circle. You'll see it either in this webinar or the next webinar for restorative practice. Okay. Students can choose an activity to continue to calm themselves. Maybe you have 3 or 5 minutes to do a yoga sequence, or maybe there's a rocking chair or a calming proprioceptive movement, something with resistance, push-ups, bear crawl, walk, something with movement, something tactile like a rice or sand or clay. That can be very calming, or maybe an auditory input. Maybe I know that piano and cello have been researched to be the most calming resonant sounds for human beings. Or maybe they want to listen to a story, maybe, lower the lights. And then finally, you can have a step in regulation where a student is invited to solve whatever has happened or how they're feeling. So they might choose to reflect on the situation. They might make a plan at that point to right a wrong that they may have committed, either accidentally or intentionally. Um, think about how they're going to return to the learning environment and think about how what something that they did or something that happened may have impacted them or a classmate. They may think about checking on a friend or rectifying a mess that they made or completing some work, whatever the issue was. Here's some sample spaces. Okay, and these are very young spaces, and you can create some different spaces for older kids that don't look quite so youthful. Maybe I should go out and change some of the images here, but this is just some examples. The National Center for Restorative Approaches in Youth Settings defines restorative justice as an innovative approach to offending and inappropriate behavior that prioritizes or puts repairing harm done to relationships and people over and above the need for assigning blame and dispensing punishment. It's really important because that is the key shift in restorative practice. A restorative approach in a school shifts the emphasis from managing behavior to focusing on the building, nurturing, and repairing of relationships. That says it all. Restorative behavior practices can also be used by caregivers. They can be used in response to behavior. They support children and adults. And they can also be used in conjunction with traditional consequences. So here's a sort of comparative chart where, and this is all relative, right? But in general, this is the trend that traditional approaches often do A and restorative approaches do B, right? So if we focus on rules in a traditional approach, the approach in restorative practices is focusing on repairing harmed relationships. Very often, a traditional behavior or discipline approach will use a lens primarily of consequence and reward, whereas in a restorative paradigm, we use a lens of human need for connection and belonging. And this is really very scientifically supported, is that human beings are designed for relationship, and learning in particular in schools can't happen without that feeling of safety and relationship. Sometimes traditional approaches offer short-term solutions, but the idea is that in restorative approaches, we're teaching skills and behaviors that will reduce the reoccurrence of negative behaviors. And this next one, the polarization of victim and offender, I think is really quite true, and it's a hard paradigm shift. And really a very important one because it sends the message that as human beings, we all make mistakes. We all make bad choices at certain points and hurt other people. And that we don't have to punish ourselves mercilessly. We don't have to be punished per se mercilessly, but we can wrap it into the human experience and we can make it better. Okay? We can understand that we are all on an even ground and we all make mistakes. And we have to come together to develop a shared solution. In traditional approaches, accountability takes on the lens of punishment, but in restorative, accountability means understanding the impact that you've had on someone and repairing the harm. With traditional approaches, there's shame involved. I don't know if any of you have read Brené Brown, but shame is one of the more destructive emotions for kids and adults and everyone. And we want to stay away from that in our schools. And shame can also lead to emotional withdrawal. Restorative approaches remove shame and emphasize repair, humanness, and connection. And traditionally, we often remove students from the learning community, whereas with restorative approaches, the goal is to keep the community together. So I just really like this chart. It sort of says a lot. So let's talk about the origin and the need. So the origin of restorative practices comes from Native American and First Nation and Maori culture. And based on this idea that conflict impacts the entire community and that harm ultimately is felt collectively. In the fields of psychology, social work, counseling, we encourage the identification of feelings of hurt and harm, and we try to move individuals forward, right, into resolution, and repair. And then we have the juvenile justice system, which took on in the 1970s sort of a more restorative justice approach, where taking responsibility for actions and making sure the victims were heard by perpetrators began. In schools, we are using restorative practices as an alternative to exclusionary discipline. It's an alternative to the zero tolerance policies that had gained popularity in the 80s and the 90s. And it sort of works against harsh and predetermined punishments for students. And the result is, or we hope, is that it addresses really the dramatic disproportionality that was happening through exclusionary practices. Those exclusionary practices were disproportionately affecting male students, African American students, and students with disabilities, leading to those groups of students missing considerable amounts of instruction more so than other students. And this is a quote from America's Promise Alliance from 2018. Kids who are suspended or expelled are more likely to drop out and disconnect from their education for three reasons. One, the true root of the problem is never addressed. Their learning is interrupted, or the students feel devalued or disconnected from their school community. Additionally, students of color, males, and students with disabilities are disproportionately targeted by exclusionary discipline practices. Research does show that restorative practices implemented with fidelity, important, can improve test scores, reading levels, graduation rates, school climate for school community, attendance, especially in middle schools. And you can see that 34 studies on the bottom are listed. Here's more research support. An evaluation of the Circle Forward Restorative Circles program in Boston Public Schools found that the program had a positive effect on student attendance. And there's another one from Pittsburgh Public Schools, which included community building circles. And the result was significant reductions in student suspensions and improved school climate perceptions. Here's another study from Oakland Unified School District found that implementation was associated with improved attendance and reading achievement and decreases in suspensions and discipline incidents. And the greatest cumulative change in chronic absenteeism was for middle schools with a restorative justice program, a drop of 24% compared to an increase of 62.3% in the non-restorative justice middle schools over the same period of time. So in the controls, there was an increase of 62.3. We have talked a little bit about the brain in prior sessions in these charter webinars, but this slide is really just speaking to the biological need for belonging. Okay, we have our reptilian brain or our lower brain that is reactive. You see it in red in the picture. To threats, it's constantly scanning for fight or flight. And then we have the middle brain that's responsible for social and emotional behaviors, for feelings, and all of our neurochemicals are produced there. Both our cortisol, which is responsible or for our stress, and oxytocin, which makes us feel better. And then we have our upper brain, which is our executive functioning, thoughts, planning, decision making. People are wired to connect. All right, let's talk about the emotional impact. So, social emotional learning has gotten a big push over the last decade or so. And here we have, and you've seen this before in other sessions, earlier slideshows and presentations, that this is our castle wheel right here. And these are our core competencies, 5 of them. Social emotional learning and restorative practices, they foster problem solving. They foster responsibility, taking responsibility for your behavior, relationship building, empathy, and belonging, all of which are entwined in our social emotional competencies. And I encourage you to go to the Castle website because it's a fabulous website for social emotional learning, and it'll give you everything you need without having to buy a social emotional learning curriculum. Restorative practices, they discourage shame and promote responsibility. Like I said earlier, Brene Brown, she's your shame guru. If you don't know her, and I'll bet you do, but if you don't, you can go on the internet and Google her. She's got some books, she's got great videos, she's got TED Talks. I think she has I think she has a podcast now. Um, Here's some quotes related to shame. The shamed child, these quotes are not from Brene Brown, they're from Joan Goodman. It's from a book, The Shame of Shaming. The shamed child is unlikely to reflect on whether and why her behavior was wrong. More likely, she will conclude, I must have done wrong because you think I did wrong. So you eliminate reflection when shame is in the picture. When students decide that they don't deserve the criticism, shaming strategies fail completely, and chances of a workable relationship between student and teacher or student and student fade or disintegrate into a power struggle. We have seen this relationship piggy bank before. And just to summarize, when we are working in a restorative practices environment, we want to make sure that we build very strong relationships between students and students and teachers and students and teachers and teachers, actually. When we take from the piggy bank, right, we want to make sure that there's enough in the piggy bank so we don't get overdrawn. Okay, so the way that we do that is we actively form strong relationships. When kids are in school, we're constantly withdrawing from the piggy bank. We're asking them to do all sorts of things all day long that are challenging, that take away their autonomy, that are things that they don't want to do. And in order to help that happen, we have to fill the piggy bank with really, really, really strong relationships so that we have energy to draw on. We talked a little bit about this already. There's our amygdala right in there, the circular part. Just some images that you can use as teaching tools with kids to talk about the bottom here. The amygdala is responsible for your autonomic responses associated with fear. So that's when we have the fight or flight responses, the emotional responses, and processing and consolidating memory, and all of those hormones like cortisol and oxytocin. This is the fight or flight hand. What's the word? The hand model that I think that we've seen earlier. Um, I forgot his name. Dan Siegel, I think, does it in an earlier webinar that I've done. And we're going to look at it.
Hold your hand up like this, fold your thumb in, close your fingers down. This is a model of your brain. So the eyes, if there is a head here, they'd be looking out the front this way. This is the outside of that brain, that wrinkly part you see when you see a brain. And at the very front, right behind your forehead here, the smart part, the prefrontal cortex. It makes the decisions. Now, inside, you can't see it, but we're going to open it up like this and we're going to see the thumb area and down here in the palm. These two areas work together. The limbic system, the emotions, the feelings part. When you feel scared, when you're really angry, when you're out of control and you're upset and you can't think straight. And here, the brain stem keeps your heart beating and your lungs breathing, and it makes you move your hand away from a hot stove really quickly. These two areas working together saves your life from a tiger. It sends out a warning signal, danger, danger, and our heart beats. We breathe fast and shallow. Our muscles tense so that we can run or we can fight and save our lives, which is very handy if a tiger is chasing you. Not so handy if you're sitting in a classroom. Now, what happens? The alarm will go off, and they're false alarms. You know, false alarms in the school when the fire alarm goes off and there was no fire, and we all have to leave the building anyway. Well, that's what happens here. Somebody might criticize you, or your teacher tells you to sit down and please do your work, and you get all upset. That's not a real alarm. You're not really in danger. Yet, the alarm is set and you flip your lid. You lose the smart part. And this part is now in control. What can you do to get this smart part back? Start breathing slow in through your nose, out through your nose, way down into your belly. Let your shoulders go. Relax, relax, relax your body and breathe. This will trick this part. Look what's happening. The smart part.
I have to laugh because she's really much more animated than Dan Siegel that you may have seen in an earlier session. So I think I would choose her. She seems really wonderful to use with kids. So you have that video available to you, okay, to talk about how their emotions can hijack them and how to bring themselves back down into the present moment. Okay. All right. So, um, let's talk about the learning brain state and some different approaches to discipline and restorative practice. So there's lots of different approaches, and you can see the restorative approach in the upper right corner. The restorative approach is where we do with students, okay? And students are encouraged to be reflective, attuned to others, feel connected and accountable to the community. And ideally the brain state, right? This results in a relaxed alertness. Now, some of the other approaches, and that's where we have high boundaries. You can see on the sides up the left hand axis and on the bottom horizontal axis, you can see that that purple box sits in high support and high boundaries. Now, underneath there, we have something called a permissive approach, and that's when we do for students. We are overly permissive. We may be coddling them too much, and we may be passively sort of reinforcing negative behavior with them. Okay, and the brain state might be sort of passively enabled. And students can sort of sit back and let things happen for them. Okay. Over on the left, in our low support areas, okay, in the bottom left, we have an uninvolved approach where we actually don't do a lot for students, but we also don't do much to encourage their reflection or their attunement or their engagement. And students may start to feel distressed or neglected. They may not be able to pay attention because they don't have the internal discipline. And this can result in reactive defensiveness. And in the upper right, we have an authoritarian approach, right? Which means basically we are doing to students, we're making the decisions for them without them. And students can feel stigmatized or under threat, which means hypervigilant. They have to remain hypervigilant. And they may feel like they have reduced executive function because they're feeling hypervigilant. And that's what happens in your brain is when you have to be hypervigilant or you're anxious, you have lowered executive function, you have reduced memory. Okay, so this is a good visual to think about what you're after in terms of management in your classroom. Go for the upper right. We want high boundaries and high support and a restorative approach. The New Hampshire Law 193.13 recognizes that we need to implement graduated sanctions to address student behavior before we take students out of the learning environment, meaning suspension or expulsion. And that law is specifically asks us to use approaches like restorative practices so that we can keep students in the learning community. Okay. Restorative practices. What do you have at your disposal? First thing, and you're very familiar with this, you have your community agreements that you make with your students all together, brainstorming with them about what agreements will keep our learning environment safe, connected, fun, responsible. And you can do this activity with your students. You can write them out. Students can sign them. You post them. The second one is community circles. That's getting together at the beginning of the day or the end of the day on a regular basis, either every day, every other day, to develop connection, belonging. There's a strategy called cognitive reframing that you can use to support productive conversations between students and adults. Restorative conversations are really circles that are specifically designed to address behaviors that happened, things that happened already, so that we can de-escalate them. And oh, those are restorative circles, restorative conversations. And then we have restorative circles that you can, again, those are community circles that are designed to address specific conflicts. This is sort of the continuum. The simplest and most basic is community agreements. And then we see where each of those things falls on our restorative practices continuum. And restorative circles are at the most extreme. And what I will tell you is the the practices just prior need to be in place. In other words, you don't want to start to implement restorative circles if your culture is unaccustomed to community agreements, to community circles, to cognitive reframing, right? So you want to build your restorative environment. Here's some info, sort of compare, contrast, and some examples of classroom rules versus community agreements. So in general, right, classroom rules focus on compliance. They focus on the non-negotiables, okay? The big no's. Um, they're often created by the teacher and delivered to students. They're based on school rules, and their focus is really managing behavior, disruptive behavior. Whereas community agreements focus on engagement and belonging. They include non-negotiables, which are the big no's, but they focus on growth. They're created by students with the teacher or leaders. They're based on values, right? So you're going to have conversations with your kids about values. Administrators are going to have conversations with their educational staff about their values. And then those community agreements are statements that are written that highlight those values. And finally, community agreements focus on positive learning habits for teachers and for students. On the right-hand side, you can see some positive agreements. We help peers when they're struggling. When we make mistakes, we take responsibility for them and make a plan to improve. Our school is a caring community of unique people. We use kind language. We support each other as learners by listening and asking and answering questions. Those feel and sound very different from classroom rules. So you have the shared values at the base of our tree. And the big no's and the norms and the agreements all stem from the community, the school community's shared values. Okay. And big no's are safety focused, like no pushing, right? Um, no climbing out of windows. Okay, no climbing on furniture. Those are some big no's. Okay. Norms are statements that transcend the entire community. So, for example, one value at a school might be the value of respect. Okay, so if our school is built on the value of respect, okay, one of our norms might be dressing in a way that respects the community members around us and not wearing clothing that's insulting or distracting or, that's just an example. And then for agreements, those are the agreements you make with students in your classroom that are based on the students in front of you and their shared values and needs. Okay. Community circles. Now, the circle is really the heart of restorative practice. And there's a reason because it's non-hierarchical. Everyone can be seen from every spot. Think about it when you go out for dinner and sit at a circular table with 8 people versus a rectangular table. The people on each end don't get to talk to each other. Whereas in a circle, you have shared togetherness, and the circle is very flexible. In a community circle, adults are responsible for creating with students a safe and supportive space. They are responsible for helping students to consider the values that students want to share for further exploration, like empathy, compassion, forgiveness. They help students stay present through things like talking sticks and protocols, focal points. Adults need to plan ahead and think about the circle in advance and invite students' experience into the space. And also be sure to share your own experiences in a professional, responsible way and use the community agreements to keep the circle functioning in a healthy way. We use circles to help students be seen, feel seen, okay? Or educators. For administrators, you can use this with your education staff. It's the same principles. We want our community members to be seen, heard, and known. We want the message of you're important, you belong here. The teacher is an equal participant. The teacher can facilitate, but stay away from directing and taking control. And you can share facilitation if it's possible with the kids that you have or the teachers or educators that you have. You can take your community circle and it can translate into a circle for repair when there's been a disruption. Some ideas. You can do your circle daily or weekly. You can do check-ins. This is just examples. Where are you on a scale from 1 to 5? From misery to joy, okay? Or my favorite food, or storytelling about embarrassing moment. Here's a structure for your circle, okay? Speak what you feel and listen for real. I love that. I was a teacher from Flynn at the Flynn School in Burlington. 2 minutes to start the circle, invite everyone, review agreements, use a talking piece. Circle's not mandatory. If someone needs to sit outside the circle at first, that's okay. Speaking isn't mandatory. Doing the work, 8 to 10 minutes. There might be a topic, storytelling, connection, and then closing. Appreciations, praise for being authentic in your participation, and something about looking forward to the next. I'm going to play this. This is a short example of a community circle at the high school level.
They come in, they're giggling, they're laughing, and there's just like a lot of kind of like giddy, intense energy. Coming for what? And in a circle, and their relationships with each other actually kind of like quiet something in them and allow them to be more present for each other.
Not going to play the whole thing. It's going to be too
When
long.
we do circles here, before we do the circles, we sit down and like plan the opening ceremony. And my great hope is to laugh as much as I cry, to get my work done and try to love someone. And I have enough courage to accept the love in return. Maya Angelou. And in high school, especially, like we don't have enough, connections with each other. Sometimes, everybody just all focused on the work and, stress at home and stuff like that. And circles create a space where people could talk about their feelings, about how they're doing home life. Now we will review.
I'm going to keep going. And here's an elementary school example. Morning meeting.
Anybody want to share about how they're feeling today? Evan, how are you feeling? You're feeling hungry. Big surprise, right? Owen, how are you feeling today?
Feeling sleepy, excited, and fun.
Wow, you're feeling lots of emotions today. And finally, definitely noticed a change in some of my shyer students. At the beginning of the year, they're really kind of clammed up and they're nervous. But then as the year progresses, they really open up and feel comfortable sharing things about their family or things that might not be so comfortable to share. And we become a support system for each other,
It's right here in New Hampshire.
no matter what kind of morning they had at home. They're going to come into my classroom. They're going to sit in a circle and be with their friends. Just having that kind of clear structure and expectation just puts them at ease.
Great time.
In order to get any kid to learn, they really have to feel safe. They have to feel respected. Without that, you're not going to accomplish much academically.
Okay, I'm going to keep going.
The greedy.
So you can see that you can do a community circle, high school, middle school, elementary school, okay, and you can get the flavor for that. Um, we have some resources for you here, and there's a part 2 that we're going to go to in a second. All right. Um, on top here, we have some one-pagers about conducting restorative circles, having restorative conversations, and carrying community circles. And then these are some examples, okay, that you can access. I'm going to see a part 2 in a second, all right? But we wanted to chop them up into 30-minute intervals or somewhere around that. So I'll be back, and I hope to see you in part 2.